Hello and welcome to the podcast You're Better Than That, hosted by me, Hannah, and joined by my friend Zoe. Hi Zoe, we're back here again.
Yes, we are. Hello.
Hello, it is good to see you.
And you.
And to chat to you. We are at the beginning of the school holidays. That is where we are right now, and people listening will be probably into the summer holidays. And it's like a total double-edged sword, the summer holiday, because I love the fact that the mornings have a bit less of the racing. Like I can spend a little bit more time thinking about myself in the morning because my children are not up as early. Well, some of them aren't. But it can massively impact productivity and brain space for those of us who at least partly work at home. It was mental here yesterday, wasn't it? It was literally like Clapham Junction. People coming and going, hairstyles, friends arriving. What else was going on?
Oh,
food.
Gosh. Yeah. Just classic
Constant,
family life,
classic,
isn't it?
in and out. And we had to go and remove ourselves because we couldn't think straight. So there is definitely this is better, this is challenging. So shout out to anyone listening who is juggling and enjoying the school holidays as they're listening. And on top of that, like to this episode, I think what we're going to talk about today, I think this one is really, really important. And the reason I think that is that years ago, I think it was in lockdown, I did a series of stories on Instagram, like Instagram Lives, and I called them the Disappointment Diaries. And I interviewed some people I knew who had experienced disappointment in some type of way of their life. And I cannot tell you how much engagement, interest, messages, conversation that came off the back of it. So many people saying, we just don't talk about disappointment. So we thought we would today.
Yes. Do you want to kick us off?
Well, yeah. I mean, disappointment or great expectations, that's the other way we could look at this because they're kind of connected things. How are your expectations and therefore what you're disappointed about? Feels like an emotion or a situation that I just don't think gets enough conversation. I think we talk a lot about depression and anxiety. I just don't think we always face the whole disappointment thing. And I'm literally right now, I was reflecting last night that there's something I'm waiting to hear about in my life, and I am bracing myself for future disappointment. Like I've decided that I'm probably going to be disappointed, and therefore don't get your hopes up. And no, not everybody does that. Like other people don't do that. What do you feel like you brace yourself for disappointment, or do you not? What do you do if there's something you're hoping for?
I've got positivity in my top 10.
So do I. I'll tell you why I think I do, but go on.
Interesting. Well, I was going to say, because of that, I think I overly am positive and then end up being disappointed instead of preparing for it. What about you?
Well, when it comes to everybody else, I tend to think it's going to work out for them. And I've got this really interesting dynamic that, again, I think has massively impacted the way I do this. I think that when I was growing up, my mum would have this strange way of saying we can do anything, what we want to. She would be unbelievably encouraging. You know, Hannah, you're really brilliant at this. You're going to be great at that. You can do that if you want to. And yet she would do this funny thing that she would then be like, but it probably won't happen. Don't get your hopes up. It probably won't be what you think it's going to be. So she'd almost be like, shoot for the stars, but it probably isn't going to happen. And I feel like I approach things for myself with that mentality. And I think sometimes for my children, I might do that as well, because it's hard to think of your children being disappointed. But I really push against doing it with them because I never liked my mum doing it. Like my mum did it from a really lovely place, but it always just used to make me feel like you're preempting disappointment for me. And the reality is she was right. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But I'm not sure it prepared me for disappointment in a healthy way, because we're going to be disappointed anyway when things don't work out. So why do we preempt it?
Yeah.
You've got to kind of get your hopes up. If you don't get your hopes up, you're living in this like state of disappointment. And so I really want to talk about this because I know that it has really impacted the way I view things for myself. And life as amazing as it can be, is a series of disappointments as well.
Can you give, I know you've said you're currently processing one, but one specific example in your life where you've had to deal with disappointment?
Oh my goodness. There are so many examples of disappointment that I could give. I've been disappointed in myself and disappointed in the way I've handled loads of things. I've been disappointed in friendships that have not gone the distance or have not been how I thought they were going to be. I've been disappointed when I didn't get jobs that I thought I was going to get, or opportunities that I thought I was going to get. I've been disappointed in people's behaviour. And that sounds like I'm living disappointed. Like, I really want to make it clear that I am not. I am so grateful for so many things. But I just think we need to talk about disappointment because it feels like a negative thing to feel. It sounds like you're not very grateful if you're disappointed. And when disappointment isn't dealt with well, I think it's quite dangerous for a person. A bit like what I'm saying around having this almost future-proofing, don't get your hopes up because you're going to be disappointed, literally makes you disappointed before the disappointment's happened. And I don't want anyone listening to feel like that. I think that we have to, have the expectation that things are going to be good. And when I'm coaching people and they say, I'm so worried about something not working out, I'm so worried if I go for that job and I don't get it, I just kind of give them the reality check of, look, you can't protect yourself from the disappointment you're going to feel, but you'll get over it. Yeah. And I think that that's a really important mentality. So, yeah, there have been several significant things in my life that have felt disappointing or probably not what I was expecting. Same time, there have been loads of things that have been way better than I expected them to be as well. But the thing about disappointment really is it's essentially something not meeting our expectation, ourselves or somebody else. And actually Brené Brown puts really well what I was just talking about. She says there are too many people in the world today who decide to live disappointed rather than risk feeling disappointment. And I feel like I'm a bit at risk of that at the moment in myself. This can take the shape of numbing, foreboding joy, we'll talk about that in a minute, being cynical or critical, or just never really fully engaging. And loads of people who do my Purpose Pursuit course, they are desperate to make a change in their life, but they are worried about the risk of trying to make a change and being disappointed because it's still no better. So they risk living disappointed by just staying stagnant and things staying the same.
What's the in-between of that? Is it confidence?
I think it's about having the confidence to believe that when things don't work out, you are going to get through it. That's what I think it is, because I think toxic positivity, which is everything's fine and everything's brilliant and everything's going to work out for me, is massively unhelpful as well. Sometimes those people tend to find things do work out for them, but eventually life does come a cropper and things don't work out. And then you're a bit deluded. So I think there's a ground between living disappointment, which Brené Brown's talking about, and believing everything is always going to work out for you. And I think it's about, it's worth the risk. That's the place in the middle.
Yeah.
Now, foreboding joy, which she talks about, is one of those things where when we're in a lovely moment, like let's say you're holding your brand new baby and you're having this lovely moment with them, or you're on a holiday and you're just having this moment of life feels really, really beautiful right now, or you just have a funny conversation around the dinner table. It could be as simple as today's dinner time was just so lovely. We're all connected and everyone loves each other. Any of those lovely moments of life, the little ones or the bigger ones. Foreboding joy is when you're in that moment and you catch yourself thinking, something's around the corner and it's going to upset the apple cart. Something around the corner is going to break my heart. And so I'm not going to let myself fully engage in this lovely moment because I'm about to have my heart broken, because life is a series of challenges.
Yeah.
And you could argue that it's true, something is around the corner that might break your heart. I mean, cards on the table, the three of us as a little team, we have been discussing some really sad things just lately. Things going on for people we love, things going on for ourselves. unwell people, people who have passed away. We are going to have those conversations over and over and over again. But foreboding joy is almost not allowing yourself to feel the full joy of a moment, because you are risking the pain of what's coming around the corner, and that's going to be too much for you to handle. So we'll just hold back a bit. We won't fully let ourselves be free. And as I'm talking, I feel like I'm at risk of doing that at the moment. I'm at risk of not allowing myself to fully hope or to fully be present in a situation, because I think I'm not in control of whether it's going to work out.
How do we stay in a place where we are able to experience joy, but then also not be in toxic positivity?
Yeah.
How do we toe the line between both?
So toxic positivity, for people listening who maybe haven't heard that phrase, it's when positivity becomes, like, again, a pervasive emotion, a bit like toxic negativity can be. It's a pervasive emotion which becomes everything is good, everything is fine, and we're all going to be all right, and we don't let anything get us down, because that suggests vulnerability, or that suggests failure, or that suggests we're not good enough or resilient enough. And so toxic positivity doesn't allow people to fully engage in difficult emotion. And there are certain cultures, certain groups of people who are more inclined to this kind of behaviour, and we have to watch against it. It's a bit toxic positivity when one of my children is upset about something and I'm too quickly trying to look for the good. That's not sitting with someone and allowing them to say, yeah, do you know what, that's rubbish. It's moving on too quickly from difficult emotions. That's what toxic positivity is. It's pretending that it's okay when it's not. Sort of toxic disappointment, to coin our own phrase, is like living in a state of disappointment. So you never allow yourself to celebrate the good stuff. And sometimes we need to remind people of both those traps. You know, this is human nature, and over and over and over again, we have this tendency to move towards a certain ditch. So I remember someone talking about this before. You know, if you think about a road that we can walk down, this narrow road, but either side of it, there's this ditch we could fall into. And one side of this particular road we're talking about now is to fall into a ditch which is, oh, well, it's never going to work out for me. Nothing about my life has ever worked out. I tend to not have the great things other people do. So you start living through a lens of, poor me, nothing's been good for me, everything I've done has not worked out as I wanted to. That's a ditch we don't want to fall into, because then we view life through dark tinted glasses. The other side is we believe that we should only feel happy feelings. We should be grateful for everything. We have to put a positive spin on everything. We don't go near grief. We don't go near disappointment. We don't go near any of those tough things, and we push people away from that. That's the other ditch. So there's kind of a road we want to try and travel between both of those things. I can't remember if I've talked about this before, but there was a scene in a film called The Beach, which really impacted me years and years ago. It's a film with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and it's a book, actually. And in that film, they're like a commune of people that are looking to build the most hedonistic, happy life. And they are essentially moving towards toxic positivity. Everything is good. All life is about is happiness. Somebody becomes really unwell in this group, and they can't access, the sort of medical care, because they live in a tropical island in the middle of nowhere, and they've chosen to disassociate with that kind of living. But they can't cope with the fact he's in pain. And his pain, they're all right with it for a couple of days, but the pain doesn't go away, and he doesn't get over it. And in fact, he's seriously unwell. So they put him outside the camp. And that's essentially the best metaphor I can give for toxic positivity. Your pain is uncomfortable, so we're going to put it outside the camp. Or your own pain is uncomfortable, so we're going to put it outside the camp. On the other side, you've got people who are viewing the world through a lens of, poor me, nothing works out for me. I'm going to preempt disappointment and live in this, what Brené talks about. What does she say here? Live disappointed rather than risk feeling disappointed.
I'm just thinking about how in your course that you mentioned, you get a lot of people, mostly middle-aged women
Yep.
who are disappointed because things haven't worked out the way they thought they
Yes.
would at the point they're in life.
Yes.
What would you say to those people who haven't done your course but are feeling like, right, I'm in the middle of life, things haven't looked at all what I thought it would look like, whether that's in life, work, family? What advice would you give?
So I think, first of all, I'd say that one of the reasons you're feeling disappointed could be because life has thrown some really big curveballs that we didn't imagine. So there are some really large reasons. But also there is something that we sort of have to watch against, which is that we have a view that everything about life should feel good and easy. And actually, one of the most helpful things I ever heard was that life is actually a series of problems. That doesn't mean there aren't wonderful things, but there is always a problem that you've gone through, you're going through, or you're about to head into. And I think when you've lived a few more years, because of the nature of life, you are going to have experienced more disappointments, unless you're very unfortunate and life in your early years had deep, deep disappointment in it. So as we get older, we're experiencing more and more people's disappointment and situations. And I think sometimes we're disappointed because we've settled or we thought things might look differently. So I think what I would say to somebody is to spend some time sitting with that difficult emotion of disappointment and name it and say, I am disappointed. That doesn't mean I'm not grateful. Yeah. I am disappointed. I am grateful. So I would sit with it. And then I would begin to process, what is it that is disappointing? Are you disappointed in yourself? Are you disappointed in missed opportunities? Are you disappointed that something doesn't look like you thought you were going to do? Because actually, disappointment is a bit like grief, really. It's an emotion around loss, because this thing, maybe you're divorced, maybe your career didn't turn out, maybe you've spent 10 years training as a medic and it's so disappointing, it's not like what you thought it was. Maybe motherhood has been harder than you thought it was going to be. Maybe you moved to a new location because you thought it was going to be amazing and you're disappointed you haven't made the connections you thought you were going to do. All those things are disappointing. And it's a loss of a life or a situation or a hope that didn't turn out as you wanted it to. So we've got to kind of get under that and think disappointment is types of grief. It might not be grief like the loss of a loved one, but it is a grief of an expectation of how things might be. There are lots of things about how my life looks at 44 that are so much better than I could ever imagine, but there are also things that are disappointing and complex and complicated that it wouldn't be honest for me to say, I wish it didn't look different. And I feel, I'm saying that, recognising I have so much to be grateful for. And I'm saying that to give people permission that we can have small disappointments and really big ones. Some people are dealing with the major disappointments, which is what we covered in those stories. So I think you've got to sit with it. You've got to allow yourself to think, why am I disappointed? Did I have an unreal expectation, or has life thrown something at me that is just wholly disappointing? And then we have to begin to process those feelings and make sense, because we've got to gain perspective so that this doesn't become an all-consuming disappointment. And actually, if we process well, we can turn the corner really quite quickly. The problem is when we don't deal with something and process something, it starts to create like a layer in how we see things. So if something's disappointed you, let's take a really small disappointment or a medium one. I don't know. You didn't get the job you were hoping for. That's a medium-sized disappointment, probably. It's okay to not move on in 5 minutes from that disappointment. It's also not okay that you don't deal with that disappointment and so you stop trying to get a new job. Yeah. It's about finding a space in between that where you process properly, you let go of a whole hope and dream, because when something doesn't work out how we want it to, there's a life behind that we then don't have. So if you don't get that job, you are down the road. I remember, I'm not letting you speak, but I remember being newly married. In fact, we weren't newly married, we were getting married. And I had moved into this house that we were going to buy, this little tiny terraced house that was, by the way, so cheap, because this is before houses went mad. This is when you could buy a house, though, on little money. And we got gazumped, which means somebody came in and they offered more money than we could, and we had no more money to offer. And we had to pull out. And we actually ended up not buying a house for years after that. And then houses got very expensive and we missed that opportunity. But the disappointment I felt in that moment was not about being gazumped. It was about the whole life I'd imagined in that little home and everything that we were going to do. Disappointment in the people who had gazumped me and I thought that was unkind. Disappointment in them taking the offer. Disappointment in all the things I'd hoped and dreamed from. And when we experience those things, we have to have people who will sit with us and care for us in our disappointment and not just say, oh, there's a better house around the corner. That might be true. I don't want to hear that day. Yeah. I want you to say, this is rubbish. I'm so sorry this has happened. How can I help? Yeah.
What happens if someone has been disappointed by a loved one? How does that differ?
There's layers of disappointment levels. I mean, you can be disappointed by a loved one because they break your heart. And then sometimes people's behaviour just is a bit disappointing. So kind of there's a scale here. I say this a lot and I'm going to say it again. Uncommunicated expectations to people put everybody in a difficult position because you're being disappointed by somebody and maybe they don't know what your expectation of them was. So I think when we're disappointed, again, where appropriate, being able to talk about it is the best thing to do. If somebody's wildly disappointed us, we are then talking about, potential breakdown of relationships. Again, everything I said before, it's attached to grief. It's letting go of hopes and dreams, and learning to trust again can be incredibly difficult. And I don't want to make light of any of that. What we seem to want to do, many of us, is to get over the initial hump as quick as we possibly can. Yeah. And of course we do. Who wants to go, oh, I'd like to sit here and be really sad. But the problem with that is we become a bit dysregulated, to use a phrase that people use. There was a couple of things that happened this week, quite small things, nothing major. A text conversation with someone where there was something in it that was a little bit disappointing, and a previous situation I was in where I thought this has turned out a bit disappointing. And I could tell I'm somebody who's aware that I'm carrying that with me into other situations. I'm carrying it with me in the way I'm behaving, my expectations of others, and you see it starts to cloud everything. But if I take a bit of time, even if it's just a walk with the dog or a talk with a friend or a bit of journaling or a bit of time on my own, or because I'm a person of faith, maybe some time to pray about it, any of those things can help me draw a line. And I think we've got to learn to understand that the stuff of people dysregulates us, and we have got to process it. Otherwise we've got loads of stuff we're churning. And I am here talking about smaller disappointments. I'm not talking about life-shattering disappointment by loved ones. I would always say, trying to say to someone, when this happened, I felt disappointed because, would be ideal, if possible, to do that. Absolutely ideal to do it. I think a couple of other tips I'd tell people to do is to consider what is constructive action in any situation of disappointment. Process it. Go through the kind of let yourself experience the emotion and process it. I then think about, how do I gain perspective, the wider perspective. My sister and I do this with each other, and we can, because we are very close. I would never do this with anyone else, but we will lovingly say, reality check here when we're being. We'll let each other have a moan, and then we'll go, right, okay. Just bear in mind, you're living in a safe country, in a safe house, and all of that. And that's helpful. So some perspective and reframing perspective is important. And also, maybe can we learn to see disappointment as an indication of how much something mattered to us? And if you don't get that job you wanted, maybe that's demonstrating that there's something for you to go hard after. When something doesn't turn out as we expect, well, maybe that's a value and a priority to pursue, not to then pull yourself away from and protect yourself from. Perhaps when we feel something, it shows us that it mattered. So reframing it as, well, this shows I care. This shows I'm invested. This shows it matters. Because if I didn't feel disappointed, then maybe it's not worth my time. And then finally, it's that constructive action. What action can I take? Do I go again? How do I go again? What do I learn? You know, as cheesy as it sounds, what am I learning from why this didn't work out? How do I try again and find the courage in me to brace myself for a potential disappointment again? There's so, you know, when you think about people who have to pick themselves up from situations that could be repeatedly disappointing. I'm thinking of people who are dealing with infertility, or people who are trying to get a job and over again it hasn't worked out. There's huge courage in going again. There's huge courage. And I think I'd want to say to people as we come into close today that if you are in a situation where you're picking yourself up again and again from a disappointment, you are more courageous than you realise. And you know, as hard as it is to say this, you'll find the courage to go again. You'll find the courage to pick yourself up because you do. And you've done it before and you'll do it again. And that's a bit of tough love, but the tough love there is you will deal with the thing and you'll go again.